Other members come in hopefully soon, but we've got a quorum here. So we have the governor's office to come and make a presentation. Hello. Make sure that thing is on over there. As far as I know, it is. Doesn't sound like it. Yeah, it is, I think.
Mr. Chairman and member of the committee, thank you for inviting me today. And I think the agenda is the 2008 budget?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. I'm Shelley Nickel, the Director of the Office of Planning and Budget. I am on page 12 of 25. Is that correct? You have the same tracking document? I'm never sure. Is that right, Margie? Okay. Here to talk to you about the governor's office and all of the attached agencies. Several of those agency heads are here today and would be willing to and more than happy to answer any of your questions. The first item that you see is the removal of $50,000, which was put into the base budget for the gubernatorial transition, and obviously it was not needed, so it's being removed. The Arts, the Georgia Council for the Arts, there is a deletion and an add. The deletion was funding we put in for a federally mandated strategic plan last year. I believe that plan has been completed. The additional funds are in to support the legislation that has been introduced to create the Georgia Arts Alliance Trust Fund for Georgians to be able to take a tax exemption for contributions to the arts. That's $200,000. The next item is with the Office of Consumer Affairs, and this is the next phase of the Office of Customer Service. This is some additional staff and the operating funds for that staff to create the office and help with the governor's initiative in making us a more customer-friendly place to do business with. Under the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, you see an additional $64,000 for an additional person, a computer software engineer. It's my understanding they are in dire need of some support for their systems, of which you know their systems operations are extremely important to them and to the state. The Office of the Inspector General is a deletion for funding that we added last year to provide a prevention training program, and we're taking that out in the 08 budget. And the other issues that you see are all of the common changes that deal with salary adjustments and rental rate increases, the state health benefit plan, workers' compensation, and I think that is it. And I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have them. I believe that the funds are for marketing money and to actually set that administratively up so that people have the ability to know about the tax credit and be able to take advantage of it. No, it is when the legislation passes. I would think that would be available, yes. Sure.
Still not seeing any questions from the committee. I wanted to ask you about under the Office of Consumer Affairs, and I've had some conversations outside the meeting, so I know a little bit about this. But this, for the Office of Customer Service, we've put money. There's been money that's been appropriated for that before.
That's correct.
And what's the status of the money as far as the funds that have been appropriated for that? Is there money left over at this time that has not been spent? What's the status of that? Are there any reserves?
I believe all the funds are being utilized. Mr. Joe Doyle is here if you would like to ask him specifically about the initiative. But
okay. What I will do then is when you've finished or there's no more questions, I'll ask him to come up and
Okay.
I think he might like to do that anyway. Okay. Are there any questions from members of the committee? I wanted to ask about the, we've had, and I think this is happening throughout the appropriations bill, different agencies, including ones we don't see. And we talked about this briefly, I think, in the 07 amended process. But this process of the of funds or savings being identified by the Commission for New Georgia
Yes.
Implementer, I guess it is. He actually came and, or the chief implementer, whatever his title, he actually came and spoke to us during the 07 process about what they were doing. So I guess we have a basic understanding of them, of what they're doing and trying to identify savings. But I'm a little bit confused. I know yesterday we had the Secretary of State's office, or one day recently we had the Secretary of State's office in, and it wasn't a great amount of money. I'm thinking it was $60-some thousand, something like that had been identified. But what is the process? And in all honesty, I will tell you, I don't myself, and I can't speak for other members of the committee. That was, in my opinion, never the way that we intended for that to work. We in this committee and the General Assembly appropriated money to fund certain programs that came from the Commission for New Georgia, and I think the total savings that had been identified or projected were I want to say $273 million, a large amount of money over 7 years, something like that. But we never thought that in this process that when we saw the governor's document come to us that savings that were identified would then be turned around and appropriated in his recommendation to something else within that department. So if you can just explain to us once how does that work when our say in this 08 budget, when were savings identified, and then how does that then in turn come back to the department to say, okay, we've identified $100,000 and you can use $75,000 of that for something else? How does that process work? And I apologize for the very long question, but
that's okay. I think you're probably mostly referring to the procurement initiative that was part of the Commission for New Georgia task force, and their recommendation was to consolidate the procurement into one office, and doing procurement statewide rather on an individual basis would indeed have us provide some savings because the contracts would be negotiated at a state level. That has been done in a number of areas in procurement. The projected savings, I think, was $135 million over 5 years. And this is the first wave of procurements that we're seeing in these recommendations. The process that was used, Brad Douglas headed up the procurement, the Commissioner of the Department of Administrative Services. He brought a projection of those savings to a validation committee, which is made up of myself, Sid Johnson, the Director of Implementation, Tommy Hills, the CFO, Lynn Valinga, the State Accounting Officer, and then a professor retired professor from the University of Georgia. And that group validated the numbers that were contained in the projections. From there, state agencies were notified of how those particular savings would be included in their budgets. And they were asked to figure out how much of that total was state funds, federal funds, and other funds. The state funds, then the governor asked agency heads to propose to him a plan for the use of those savings for the 07 and 08 budgets. So state agencies did that and worked with their OPB analyst, and the analyst presented those recommendations to the governor, and he has included those in his recommendation to you.
Okay, and I guess I'm still, I know when the Department of Revenue was here in the 07 budget process, there was nothing directed toward them. I mean, it could have been in relation to any, any of the agencies, but it seems to me that we could just as easily, we could make estimates of savings too, I guess, and, in the Secretary of State's office, we could, maybe if we could estimate that instead of the $66,000, there were $166,000 of savings, and then that could have been used in health care or something like that. So,
well, the savings that were projected were based on past spending patterns of the procurement. That's how the actual numbers were derived. So in DHR, for example, they looked at what types of services DHR had contracts for and projected with these new contracts what the difference in the purchase price of those services would be. And so that's where the numbers came from.
One more question. I know we have at least one question from the committee. Well, then, you'd say, I think you said that the projected savings from those, from the suggestions from the Commission in New Georgia would come up to about, what,
$135 million.
$135 million.
Mm-hmm. Over a 5-year period of
so
time.
At some point, at the end of the 5 years, then all these things will be totaled up, and all these, and we're not going to lose track of them. I mean,
absolutely not.
Okay. It seemed like we're going kind of slow, though, based on the numbers have been 66,000 and, 48,000.
The amount of money that was, I believe, in the amended budget was $13 million and 20-some million in the 08 budget. Now, not all of that was state funds. A portion of it that hovered around 45%, I believe,
okay,
were state funds. But, I think we are on track in terms of achieving the 135 over the 5-year period.
Okay. It just, I guess it's just a philosophical. It just seems like that. Did you ever? May I ask you? Did you ever, when we were talking about these, the funding for implementing those new Georgia suggestions? I mean, was it ever your department's thought that that money would just be offered back then to the agencies for them to spend, and within what the governor recommended?
I believe it was the intention that to have the agencies make a proposal on the use of those funds so that they would continue to see the value of finding efficiencies within their budgets so that they would be able to share in the savings.
Okay. And in all honesty, I don't remember that ever being brought up like that. There is a question, 23. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was trying to remember, how are you? And
good,
I'm
how are
sorry
you?
I got in just a little bit late. I think part of what the confusion that all of us might be experiencing on this committee, who served on this committee back when we were examining the Commission on New Georgia, as legislators we were asked to expend X number of millions of dollars for the program, and we, as we studied it, understood that there would be considerable savings, but probably part of the confusion is coming in. It's the way it was presented, it looked like the savings would go to the general funds. And so that's where I think a lot of the questions are coming from. And instead, and anybody who's a business owner understands the importance of encouraging efficiencies with the people who work for you. But I think that's, as legislators going back, we're not quite able to say, to document in the beginning what we thought would be happening with the Commission on New Georgia. So that's where Mr. Chairman, I think that's where some of the confusion is coming from. I'm trying to remember the year it was presented, so 2 years ago. And so I think most of us were on the committee at that time. So that's why the questions, my questions are like they are as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank
I think
you.
we'll give them an opportunity to speak about this customer service center. Thank you. We appreciate
You're
your time
welcome.
today.
I appreciate you hearing me. My name is Doug.
If you
Do you mind if I hand out that?
And the only reason I would ask you to go over there is because of this. You're on TV. You're on the web, and they archive this. And what happens is, I know we had a session where we had to go back and take a look at it. Unless you're at a microphone, it's just a low blur, a low hum. Sorry.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I'm glad that you have questions about what we're doing, because I'd like you to fully understand. And I'll answer your question quickly, that the money that we were appropriated for fiscal year 07 will be totally utilized in fiscal year 07. If you don't mind, I'd like to take just a second to go through with you what we are doing with the funds so that you have a better understanding.
Okay, and let me, and I appreciate it very much. In fact, I want you to have the opportunity to do this. I would just ask you to be fairly brief, and I know you will, and the reason is I want to try to keep on schedule. We have Department of Revenue. I don't want to hold them up. We held you guys up, so I guess we hold them up too, but if you just, and I know you will be, but just be brief. And
I will. If I'm going too long, let me know. Our budget request for 08 calls for $2.743 million that we'll be using to achieve the goals of speeding up processes in the state, developing a customer-focused workforce, and improving statewide call handling to make it easier for citizens to get what they expect from government. Citizens' number one complaint with government is it takes too long to get anything done. To remedy that, we're working with engineers from Georgia Tech who are assigned to us on our budget to speed up processes in target agencies where we see there are big opportunities. The second thing, citizens say government employees are not always helpful, and we can fix that too. We're currently working with 44 agencies that have over 90% of the state's workforce. We've adopted common values and commitments to all the customers in the state to see how we're doing and to focus and pinpoint the work we need to do. We've developed customer service and employee satisfaction surveys to know what's going right and what's not going as well as it could be, so that we're not all over the map trying to do things. To drive behavioral changes, we've developed, with the money you've supported us with, training programs for all the employees in the state. We are developing recognition programs of a statewide nature that do not involve spending money, so we're not trying to give people bonuses for that. And we're developing performance management systems to help drive the culture change that we need. We're asking $500,000 to continue that work. In 2005, for a little background, we learned that we had 26 call centers in the state that handled 10 million calls a year. There was a lot of inconsistency and a lot of dissatisfaction. One of the call centers had 62% of all calls abandoned. One had an average wait time of 56 minutes, and you know that's intolerable for yourself, me, or our next-door neighbors. Over 930,000 of those calls, the callers were transferred to the wrong place, which is extremely frustrating. Our call handling goals are to optimize first call resolution to make sure citizens get to the right place with one phone call, to meet or exceed industry standards in all 26 state call centers, focusing on the speed to answer and lowering abandonment rates. We're dividing this work up into two areas. One, to improve the performance of the existing 26 call centers to industry standards, and remaking an existing call center that's housed at GTA today into what we call a GIC, or a General Information Call Center, to help citizens. The first part of this work to improve existing call centers, we're asking your support for $998,000, and the largest part of this money is to remake the technology in 4 of our large call centers to standardize service and cost operations. And I think it's important to think about that in a way. What we're doing is very similar to what procurement and asset management is doing, is that we're adopting an enterprise-wide solution to how we manage costs and service in all of the state's call centers. We're also requesting $945,000 to remake the GTA Directory Assistance Call Center. This will give Georgians who are unfamiliar with state government one number to call where we guarantee we'll get them to the right place. This money will be used to develop a knowledge base or directory of what all the programs and services are, and to provide for enough operators to answer the calls and to provide quality and service assurance. And an interesting thing I think you would appreciate is by the end of the year we will have a remote worker program so that call centers around the state can hire employees who live and work from home. This would help people with disabilities and people with small children. We've been having tremendous success so far this year, and I really appreciate your continued support.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. We do have a question.
Sure. Excuse me? I think we're at 2.7 would be 5.7. We have $3 million in continuance, $2.7 million improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir, for your presentation. I guess, tongue-in-cheek, I'm just asking if there couldn't be a one number for legislators to call to get help.
You will, and the people that work for you in your office will have the same one number accessible with the same answers from the web where people could go in and find the answers. But this would be available on a statewide server that virtually anybody in the state could access if they wanted. They could do it telephonically or on the web.
My point, your legislators sometimes need to get through to a key person, and that still is at times difficult to do. I applaud you for this effort and for our citizens, but I'm just putting a plug in for a direct channel to up above.
That is a very good plug as well, and part of the work we're doing with the agency call centers is to develop escalation paths for people that need to get in on an emergency type basis to be able to do that, which doesn't exist.
It wouldn't be emergency, it would be efficiency. We too wish that. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the on that line item in the tracking document. It shows that let's see, of that 2.7 million is for additional 38 positions, blah blah blah. This includes $5,974 in Commission on New Georgia savings. Do you know anything about what savings?
I think that was a savings through the GTA telephony contract that they initiated. But I think, is that correct, Shelley? That applied to, was for OCA, for our host agency is the Office of Consumer Affairs. And that savings came through, I believe, a GTA contract.
Okay. And this isn't, and I'm going to say this, and this is nothing, you don't have anything to do with it, but for the people of Georgia, and hopefully there's some of them that are tuned in on the Internet or logged into the Internet, whatever you call it. But in fact, that's not $6,000 of savings, because they haven't saved anything because that money's gone back into this program. So, I mean, it's identified here as savings, but not to the taxpayer because it's been spent anyway. So, but that's not true. You're here because of the call center, and I appreciate it, and we wish you well. We've had different conversations about this. Is a very this is not a round number. $2,742,986. $86. I mean, can we take $86 off of it? Can we take 986? 2,980? How much can we take off of that?
I cannot recommend taking anything off of it
Okay.
without changing.
Not
the
even
scope
the
of what we're doing.
$6.
But I will put in any rounding errors from my pocket, if that helps.
All right, I have to ask you those questions. Thank you, sir.
No, I know, and I really appreciate your support.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
All right, thank you all. That concludes I believe it concludes the governor's office, unless there's somebody else with the governor's office that wishes to speak. Apparently not. And next on the agenda is Department of Revenue.
Well, take your time. Our budget director left to make a couple copies of an exhibit that y'all might find helpful, and he has disappeared. So, I think one thing while we're waiting, if I may, that may help unravel some of the mysteries. I thought about some of the questions you asked us before and some of the questioning you just had. Is we originally were asked to submit a flat budget from the previous year and then to put in white papers for any particular new initiatives. And I think our expectations originally were that if any of those new initiatives got approved, the money would be approved in the governor's budget to support it. As it turned out, part of the money was approved for the new initiative, and the other money to balance it out was the projected savings from the Commission for New Georgia Savings. So that if we don't realize those savings, we're going to stop some activity somewhere to make sure we don't spend too much money. So it's more of from our perspective, it came across more of an evolutionary process than something that hasn't occurred yet, which is the point you got to just then. With respect to our 2008 budget, again, the proposal was for a flat budget with two requests to support the implementation of the beginning phases of a data warehouse, and the second was for an integration of our tax systems, and we'll have some exhibits on that. Looking at the tracking sheet, line item 40.0 and 40.01 on the common changes, it's my understanding that those are all just the formula-based salary increases that went across the board for the department. 40.2 and 40.8, that's just a realignment where we had $5,000 worth of funding for the State Board of Equalization, which is composed of myself, Russell Hinton as the state auditor, and Gina Abram as the state property officer, to move that $5,000 into our customer service program, just to take one program out of the budget. So it really added more administration when that Board of Equalization really exists as a customer service enhancement for utilities that we centrally assess. And under tax compliance, one of the requests that was made in numerous hearings during the House tax reform hearings during the course of the summer was whether or not the department needed new auditors. On order of magnitude, we could probably use 100 or 150, but we can't hire that many fast enough and train them as fast as we want them to operate in our platform. We asked for 25. The governor agreed to let us hire 12 more and provided funding for those 12, and the other 13 we in essence have to run with a lower vacancy rate from the normal turnover we have during the course of the year. And you'll see on item 40-.10.2 is the initial funding for the data warehouse. And then and that's the net of what the presentation is. I think there's some projected growth in the HTRG, the Homestead Relief Grant, but again, all that is straight pass-through money that either goes to the counties to redistribute to their property tax owners, or it comes back to the general fund if and when there's a surplus.
Did you, Commissioner, did you address 40.10.1, or did I just slip right by me? The $3,600,000. Well, that's a portion of the funding for the data warehouse
beginning implementation of the data warehouse. Part of that money that's necessary for the data warehouse is over in our capital request, and part of it is here in operations for things like the programming that would be necessary to go into it. That's designed to be both a efficiency generator for the department so that we don't have people geographically located in Savannah working on an account, for instance, and people geographically located in Atlanta working on an Atlanta business when they're owned by the same person. Right now, we have to independently, or our examiners have to, and auditors have to go out independently and look at numerous sources of information from the Secretary of State to Dun & Bradstreet, et cetera. Having a central database that pools all that publicly available information will make the department more efficient, as well as help us resolve outstanding tax delinquencies or answer taxpayer questions faster by having that information. And the way we've outlined these programs, and when Chris Walker gets back with the exhibits, I'll be able to leave with you that each of this project, the auditors, and the integrated tax system, the implementation of that is being scoped such that there's a return on investment every year from the year we started, that it's not 3 or 4 years before we start realizing benefits from it.
Okay, I think there's a question. I don't. Do you have a question?
Yeah, please.
And what? You're 28, right? Okay.
I'd like to go back and get you a little more information on the data warehouse and that data. You talk about that kind of money. You talk about personnel hours.
No, the only person that would not be new added permanent staff to the department. That would just be programmers that are necessary to install the data warehouse into. Yes, sir. And contractors or vendors, professional staff that comes into that, and that's why it's in this budget and not all being capitalized. In the other.
Back up to the 737 for 12 additional compliance officers. I've asked you this in times past. What is the ratio of return on the investment in these officers?
Depending on the type of exams that they do, whether they be individual or corporate audits, a full-time equivalent auditor will generate easily between $1 million and $2 million a year, on average $1.6 million a year, in what otherwise would be uncollected funds. And that.
Reasonable to expect $12 million plus a year.
Easily. Easily. I mean, we've had multiple cases that we've done press releases on this year, where in single audit exercises, one company forfeited $90 million, another forfeited $47 million, and we audit less than 1% of every population, every demographic, every tax type, all year, every year. And most people would tell you the standard should be somewhere between 2 and 3%. So we're nowhere near the point of a declining rate of return of what these folks, when properly trained, should deliver. And these numbers include waiving a lot of penalties along the way. We don't always charge every bit of penalty that we have the authority to charge.
We could leave it to fund the 25.
Yes, sir. And knowing that this far in advance, we would be able to get them hired and trained and deployed by July 1. It's harder on the amended to get them in cycle fast enough, but we can certainly do it now. And the other thing that we're doing to try to improve the productivity of them too is hiring them at a higher, more competitive pay scale, rather than seeing how cheap we can get people and have them get hired away as soon as possible from another jurisdiction or from a private company.
Let me ask you, Commissioner. Now, this $3,600,000. How is that identified? How is that cost identified to you? Is that the GTA identify that, or how's that arrived at?
that's a collaborative process of ourselves working with both GTA and a number of different vendors who are in this marketplace and what implementations they've done in other states. Historically, the department often developed programs, whether it be software or hardware programs, on a proprietary nature. The stuff that we're buying today and recommending for purchase today are all market-based products that are being developed and implemented and market tested in other states, in other jurisdictions, in some cases countries, so that once we implement it, then those vendors are out selling it to other jurisdictions and doing enhancements, and they bring us back the enhancement rather than us trying to do the enhancements internally. What is it? Do you want to comment briefly on how we got to that number working with GTA and the vendors?
Yes, the $3.6 million it consists of the data warehouse consulting services to actually build the data warehouse and load the data, and also building of the programs which enable DNR to compare and match the internal data from DOR with the data from the external sources, the Dun & Bradstreets, excuse me, the Equifaxes, possibly Secretary of State, Department of Labor, other agencies that might have relevant data as well. And the total of that is the $3.6 million.
Well, let me ask you, and I ask these things with all, I mean to ask them with all due respect. Is this the kind of project if this subcommittee or even later in full committee or wherever, if this money, some of this money had to be used for, say, health care, is this something that if it were reduced that you just could not, I mean, this project is such that you couldn't do it, period, or if it were half, could you still do half the project? In other words, if we were to cut it anything, would it be better or would it be just as well to cut the whole thing out? And I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I'm trying to get an idea of the scope of it and what it would actually do.
Well, without being sarcastic, what I'd rather you do is follow Chairman O'Neill's bill that he dropped to take on the real estate investment trust's sham transactions, which is estimated to be in the value of $30 or $40 million a year in evaded taxes, or to close some of the loophole that revolves around low-income housing credits. And that's another $30 to $40 million. That industry even came to us this year and offered to tighten that language up because they know at some point somebody's going to catch on to it.
I understand.
So I'm more happy to hand you $60 million than for you to attack this. But the way we've tried to scope this is most states would go out and ask for $25 to $30 million to do a data warehouse, to do full implementation of the total project in year one, full funding in year one. The way we've tried to do this, and the only way we were able to get the governor's support, is to take off pieces of what could be deployable in a given year and start yielding results in the same year. So it would be very difficult to have much of it. Anything's better than where we are today, having to ping each different resource and information source to try to gain information. That's why we need more auditors to get more around. So, could it be done? Yes. Could it be as effective? It would not be as effective, and we would want to recast what the return on investment was each subsequent year. So what we probably need to do is give to you the return on investment presentation that was shared with the governor when we first went through the budget process, and then I'd need to ask my compliance people and the technology people if it would be worth even having if it had to be cut.
And that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
So in order to answer that thoroughly, I'd like to be able to get back to you in a chart form within 48 hours. Okay.
And then, and there is another question, but I'm going to continue since I'm on this line of thought. If you would just tell me if this weren't funded in this fiscal year, what actually would be the real impact of it? What would you would continue doing things the way that you are now? What would be the impact if we just didn't fund it this year and looked at it next fiscal year?
Where's the full package? first year of implementation of the project,
I'm sorry.
in the
yes.
first year of implementation of the project, scoped the way it's scoped today, by spending $3.6 million in the first year, we committed to the governor that, based on empirical information provided by vendors that have done this in other states, that the return in Georgia would be $3.8 million. It would pay for itself in the
Okay.
first phase. Pay for it. In the second year, it was $47.2 million, with only an additional $3.8 million requested. And if we stayed on the path that we started, we'd ask for $3.6 million this year. It would deliver $3.8 million in the same year. Next year, we would ask for $3.8 million with a projected benefit of $47.2 million that we could document and validate. So as fast as Georgia's growing and as much evasion as is out there, we could do it. We can do the job. We can do the job with 50% of what we spend today to do it.
All right.
But the results will be far different.
Okay, thank you. Chairman of Natural Resources, Lynn Smith, has a question.
Thank you. And
Get them copies of this.
for several years now, I have been advocating that I think your department needs more auditors. So I'm glad to see that that is gradually happening. I have a question for you, though, on the other end. If you're on the receiving end of an audit, Georgia Citizen can that be customer friendly as well? In other words, you're going to find some people who come out probably better and get some money back. I understand that, but a lot of times I'll get questions from people in my district like, well, you know, I've given them all this stuff yet I've not heard back from them, and I've got all this money tied up, and so are we going towards a process that will be a win-win, I guess?
Yes, I think that's accurate. Ed Maney, who runs the Tax Compliance Division, is also responsible for the audit section. He hears from me daily, certainly weekly on this, as Denise Samuels, who runs Taxpayer Services Division, which is where those kind of inquiries initially start, because that's not a full-blown audit, that's just a request for information.
Right.
Last year, some mistakes were made in processing during tax season that caused a number of people to be inconvenienced during the year, and we asked for a lot of additional information.
And I got a lot of those.
And we've now changed our programming, so we're only asking for specific information that we need to see, not any number of things that we might want to see. It may not be applicable to the taxpayer. Our tax forms this year have now broken up what historically was line 9, which was another category that had 10 of the most commonly used exemptions and deductions all bundled into one universe. And we still had railroad retirement income as a separate line item. Well, you know, when's the last time you saw anybody had railroad retirement income?
Well, the railroads might be coming back now.
Right. We'll give them a line back on the form when we do that. But so
We'll
the answer to that question is yes. But I always encourage people too to not hesitate to contact my office if they feel like they've been mistreated. We do have a practice where if an audit is started, we let it run its course, and then people have the right to appeal, both legally and just from a customer service standpoint, to test that. The other thing that we did 2 years ago, actually 3 years ago, when Richard Roy was still chairman of Ways and Means, I came to this agreement with Terry Coleman, then Speaker of the House, that if somebody thinks that we haven't treated them fairly, we put in the code, and Chairman O'Neill alluded to this the other day in bringing some of our tax bills forward this year, that if they think they've been mistreated, they're legally afforded the opportunity to give anyone, including you, a limited power of attorney. So you don't have to see all their numbers, but you can make us disclose what process we took them through to get to where we were, and whether or not we gave them their rights and treated them decently in the process. And if we did not, and that's why I put it in there, so we could be held accountable in reverse. We in cases where we've encouraged people to give that limited power of attorney, they've not taken us up on that to have that public discourse on. But we're happy to do that anytime somebody wants to. But I do want to know if an auditor has mouthed off to somebody. That's just, life's too short, and it won't be tolerated. And you can ask Mr. Maney to take the podium if you want. And we've had some personnel actions, and I'm not talking about somebody that just got suspended for the afternoon. They were done when we have found that.
And thank you for your answer. I think as we are being broadcast on the web, I think the balance is out there too. It works both ways. And I know I got lots of questions last year. To be sure I understand what you're saying, an inquiry in the beginning is not an audit. It is just that you're gathering information and trying to Help me
That's
with
correct.
that again?
You
Okay.
know, some CPAs would argue with you that if you ask a question, that narrow definition is an audit, but neither one of us will ever win that argument. So if they feel it's an audit, then I'm okay if they want to perceive it to be an audit, but it's, in the technical sense of the word, it's not. But because we have so much fraud and abuse and refund claims, both on individual tax from people using tax preparers, and I'm not talking about legitimate CPA practices. I'm talking about people that operate out of strip centers, sometimes out of their house. Sometimes they'll move apartments every week, and they'll be electronically filing returns.
Right.
With the refunds all going to the same bank account, and as soon as the taxpayer has left their office with their instant refund, immediately the preparer then changes the deductions and exemptions and claims things that the taxpayer is not entitled to. That's why also in this year's legislation you see some limited penalties against fraudulent tax preparers, because our first line of reaction is to the taxpayer. Well, if they don't know that ever even happened,
Right.
it's unfair to go after them. But that's the way the law is today.
Okay, thank you. And then there is the statute of limitation of 7 years, but does it get triggered further
Is
on that? I think there is.
Ed Maney is saying 3 years.
What now?
3 years.
Okay, help me with that, because I thought it was 7 years statute of limitation for the Department of Revenue cannot go beyond 7 years if they start auditing. Is that correct? All right, I was looking at our code section the other day, and I saw the 7, so. So if a small business got heard from y'all, and you want to go back on their records, here's where I'm going. They were told that you could go back 8 years, and I'm going, wow.
We can only go back 7 years if we filed a lien to keep the account current. If we've never filed a lien against them, we can only go back 3 years under audit.
Okay, that helps. That helps me understand it.
And so again, if this is a case from a constituent,
Right.
the question is whether or not they ever had a lien placed upon them. That would be the driver on it.
Okay, so at times have y'all run into some over-aggressive people trying to track things down and go a little bit further? Sometimes I get those calls, and I normally refer them to y'all. So.
Yeah, what I would ask you to do in a case like that, I mean, it's not that it couldn't happen. I mean, people get tired, and later, at some points in their career, and they get frustrated, and some people just do better when they're planning somewhere else. But I would encourage you to let us sometime, you refer them to us, but a
lot of them are afraid. This is why I'm asking these questions, because I go, oh no, I'd be better off that I don't want anybody to know that I've called you or that
the protection is there by us putting in the code that they can give you a limited power of attorney, and we have to validate and justify how we treated them and how our employee treated them. That's why that's there. That power of attorney, if they give it to you, then they're protected. If we push them around, then I've got to answer your question. I've got to answer it for WGST or whoever else answers.
Okay. It might be a good seminar at a later date, Mr. Chair, but I understand I probably need to stop asking my questions. But I appreciate what you're doing, because I think it helps our citizens understand as well that there is a balance to this whole process.
This is an old story that he gets tired of hearing, but before I came to the department, I'm not a tax professional by training. I was already working for the governor. And I got an inquiry.
Leaving. I don't know what that means.
I got an inquiry into one of my prior year returns, and so I called my CPA and said, I might get asked to do something in the administration. Is this going to be a problem? He said, no, we're right, they're wrong. It'll take 4 months, and it'll go away once we answer the question. Sure enough, it took 3 months. We're right, they were wrong. I got a letter back from the department. It's not $15,600. It's $60. Have a nice day.
And a $2,000 accounting bill.
And it was referenced as a computer error. Well, the computer doesn't make an error.
Right.
The error is the information that gets put in there to begin with.
Right.
And no time is fast enough to solve somebody's problem. And so we immediately began rewriting letters, form letters, in the system that just don't come across as we don't have all the influence and authority that we need. But by and large, for the average taxpayer who makes a mistake, we have all we need. We don't have all the authority we need and penalties we need for fraud and other abuse. That we certainly appreciated Representative Houston's bill last year that y'all passed on sales tax evasion. But we don't have to come out of the blocks telling somebody they're wrong. And we can come out and say, we disagree, help us understand this.
Okay.
And then if they don't comply, then we escalate the enforcement from there.
Thank you for that, 'cause I just think it's important that there be a balance there, and I understand that's your philosophy, so thanks for saying that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner, I appreciate it. I wanted to tell you, we had a request from the Georgia Municipal Association to make a brief presentation on a idea or a suggestion or a request they have regarding point-of-sale data collection. I've told them they can make a brief presentation. You can stay, and if you would want to respond to what they have to say to help us, that would be fine. Or you can your presentation is complete. You can finish. You can leave if you want to. I'm giving you the option of they're going to make. I've told them like a 3 or 4 minute presentation to us. Those of us that are left up here. So you can, if you wanted to, or if you want to say something now before they do, that's fine too. This has to do with the point-of-sale data collection, and I think you're familiar with it. So.
I am. I'll go ahead and comment now if you'll afford me the opportunity, because there's a Ways and Means Committee meeting starting right now that we'd like to participate in. But I'm more than happy to share as much information with people as the law allows us to share. There is some contention in the marketplace, if you will, that the desire for this point-of-sale information is a way to renegotiate the SPLOST negotiations between ACCG and GMA, but I'll let them work that out amongst themselves. In some cases, the term point-of-sale gets overused. In the retail world, most people think a point-of-sale is true point-of-sale. What you send through a credit card machine that's a point-of-sale. But to be accurate in what information you share, you'd really have to be able to tie together both credit card information and cash transactions to have reflect actual and accurate information, because there is so much fraud and abuse in sales tax. It's the biggest area of fraud we have in the state. We do give some of that information. We work with the City of Atlanta to do it today on the extra 1 cent that they collect. However, they maintain a database of businesses within the city footprint, which to my understanding hasn't changed in over 35 years. Last year there were 50 annexes alone, I think, in the city of Alpharetta. It's a tremendously expensive proposition to ask the department to do that individually, and without the locales maintaining the databases themselves. And we're more than happy to investigate and unwind if a county or a city thinks that we're distributing money to a county that should go to a city or vice versa. We'll look at those by zip code. We'll look at those by specific addresses reported to us, and we'll make the correction to the system. We've done that quite often in Walker County. It has to do with car dealerships. Some people have made some inquiries lately on Bartow County for the same thing. We're happy to do that. The other thing that's complicated about the process, which would make it quite expensive, is for that information to really be accurate, we are going to have to add fields of information within the GTH system and within the tax code to segregate between the counties and the cities. And if for us to use it, somebody's got to data enter it. We can't hardly get enough money for 12 new auditors, much less enough people to data enter it. When you data enter it, there's transposition error risk in that. So you'd still have bad information if you went that route. The one thing that could be helpful in the process is last year when we got the legislation authorizing their e-file e-pay system, we started with sales tax and withholding tax. We want to start the threshold mandatory filing on that e-file system at $2,500 a month. What was finally agreed on was $5,000 a month because so many businesses theoretically don't have computers, is the answer that I kept getting back. Well, that $5,000 limit only captures about 9 or 10% of the people that remit sales tax, but about 75 to 80% of the dollars that come in. If you drop that threshold to $750 a month, like the state of Alabama has, then you'd have an electronic system that captures that information. It'd be easy for us to report. One of the problems is some of the people last year that made us raise the limit to $5,000 and pass the bill are the people who want this point of sale this year. Also, to do the point of sale this year, you're going to have to add 3 to 5 pages to the sales tax return to add the additional jurisdictions that taxpayers would have to distribute the money to when they do the report. And confusion. And additional, our cost, not just on the personnel side, but our cost on the paper and printing and mailing side too. Because in the past, on those paper returns, 65% of 125,000 sales tax returns a month came back with errors, and we were doing error resolution, and that's not what y'all want to pay us to do. The e-file system makes the return reconcile before they can submit it. I could go all day on this.
Okay, well, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. And I had asked them to just give them a certain amount of time, so I will go ahead. And it may be something we want to get back together and talk about again. So, but I appreciate you coming today. Thank you very much.
All right. Chris Walker has some copies of the exhibits from our original presentation to the governor on the return on investment on the data warehouse and integrated tax that I'm asking to leave with you.
Thank you. I want to recognize Tom Gill.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Georgia Municipal Association.
My name is Tom Gale with the Georgia Municipal Association, and we've got an unusual request today. We're not necessarily asking for any money, but a better accounting of money that's generated within cities. State law does require that sales tax data be considered when counties and cities negotiate local option sales taxes and those distributions. Currently, the Department of Revenue does not collect this data by municipal jurisdictions, except, as the Commissioner said, in Atlanta. And you can ask him how many people they added to their staff for that, but as you can see from his testimony, the City of Atlanta is able to make that accounting of the money collected in their jurisdiction, and they're doing just fine. GMA is only asking that the subcommittee consider inserting legislative intent language in the Department of Revenue's budget, directing them to collect information showing whether sales taxes are collected inside of cities or in unincorporated areas. And Larry Hansen, city manager of Valdosta, up for the Bird Supper, is here to speak on the economic importance of point-of-sale data for cities.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the reason that myself and other city officials support this point-of-sale data collection as one of our highest priorities is because of the benefits it can have to us for economic development. What we need is timely, accurate information specific to our cities. Economic development today is extremely competitive and is often driven by data. Sales tax is our city's largest source of revenue, and as such, it is critical that we have accurate information on sales within our city to be able to predict and also to forecast our future. As part of my job, I work with headhunters, brokers, developers, national retailers, and others that are looking to locate or expand. They all want data, specific, verifiable data. This includes things like per capita income, population density, traffic count data. All of those we can provide. But they also want sales tax data, which we cannot provide. To have the ability to have this financial data on retail sales generated within our city is really the main missing link that we have. The outcome of having this is good for all. When cities grow and prosper, counties also grow and prosper, and the state economy grows as well. And such information as this would help us evaluate major events that are held in our communities for which we do not know the financial benefit, and even events like the sales tax holiday, which is a big deal in a border city like Valdosta. We cannot truly measure its impact under the current system. Point of sale, it's also been shown that the farther you can push down the data collection, the better the compliance. Point of sale at the municipal level has proven this in other states. So we would appreciate your consideration of this. It has been done in other states, and certainly it would be a big benefit to the cities of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and make your presentation. We appreciate it. I don't see any questions. Thank you. And I believe that concludes the Department of Revenue. And our last agency on the agenda is Natural Resource. I think I see the Commissioner here. Commissioner, we appreciate you coming, and as you know, at this time of the session, I think we're at day 22 or 23 today, and the 30th day coming up soon, at least as far as legislative days are concerned, and there are meetings all over the Capitol right now. And but you have myself here, and you have the Chairman of Natural Resources Standing Committee here, so I think that you have a good audience here to hear your presentation.
The two most important people in my life at the moment. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and as usual, I will provide the information on the 08 budget for everything except Environmental Protection Division, and Dr. Carol Counts will step up after I conclude my remarks and present that portion of our budget to you. I'm going to be working from page 15 of 25, starting with the Coastal Resources Division 34.2, if y'all have those documents in front of you. First, 34.2.3 is money in our budget, $1.3 million, to renovate 4 existing boat ramps in coastal Georgia. These boat ramps are extremely important to boating access issues, both recreationally and commercially in that part of the state. Because of the extreme high water tide fluctuations we have in coastal Georgia, those ramps undergo have a lot of maintenance needs and are more expensive to maintain than our typical lake or river boat ramps. So you'll see that $1.3 million in there, and those are for 4 ramps located in 4 different counties. Turner Creek ramp in Chatham County, the Riceboro Creek ramp in Liberty County, the Belleville ramp on the Sapelo River in McIntosh County, and the Jekyll Creek ramp in Glenn County are the 4 that we anticipate spending this money on at this time. Are there any questions about that item? If not, I'll skip down to Parks, Recreation, and Historic Sites at 34.7. This is to put funding for 33 vacant positions in the parks personnel arena. You'll also see in that explanation it mentions 11 vacant positions in the Wildlife Resources Division. The same wordage is that 34.7 it's the same as 34.10 under Wildlife Resources, and I'll cover these at the same time. Currently, we have about 200 positions that we're holding open in order to meet budget. That's having a direct impact on customer service, primarily in our state parks, where almost half of those 200 positions are being held. We also have some vacancies on some of our wildlife management areas around the state, as well as some county ranger positions. The governor agreed to put those 33 parks positions and 11 wildlife resources positions in order to meet customer service needs around the state. Also under the Parks, Recreation, and Historic Sites, we're recommending transfer of the Georgia Historical Society funding to economic development. We have a pass-through grant of about $60,000 that goes to the Georgia Historical Commission, and we agree with moving that to the Economic Development Division. I think that's a better place for them. This is tied directly to some of the tourism issues in the various counties around the state, and that's certainly not anything that we object to. At 34.73, provide funds to repair and renovate cottages and campgrounds in state parks. You'll see $2 million that's in the governor's budget for that. We have a list of needs that exceeds $2 million around our state park system. Maintenance dollars are always much needed. This will go to renovating various cabins, and we will have our maintenance staff prioritize those needs around the state. But we do have needs that much surpass this $2 million. But this is a step in the right direction, and we can do a lot of very, very, very necessary maintenance with that money. And finally, the 34.7 is to a repayment of Jekyll Island Authority money. That was money that the Jekyll Island Authority pays to us. They recommended or asked for that debt to be relieved, and this simply just makes us whole in that area. Finally, the last thing I'll mention before I do mention our one capital outlay request is 34.10, and it's something that you're very familiar with, and that's the remaining $6 million in the Governor's Go Fish Georgia initiative. I provided some information to you in a spreadsheet at our discussions under the supplemental budget, and this money is for the hatchery component of that Go Fish program. The final item that we have is in capital outlay, and that's to complete the Burke County public fishing area. We had a number of public fishing areas that were planned throughout the state of Georgia. All of those have either now been built or are in the final phases of being built. We have the 404 permit. We have partial funding for Burke County. This will allow us to finish that particular project and conclude that public fishing area program that we initiated several years ago in the Department of Natural Resources. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Yes. Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, sir. How are you? Just to clarify for all of us looking at your parks, recreation, historic sites, and your wildlife resources, you're referring to the same 33 vacant positions, but the $440,000 wildlife is directed towards game management. So that will be, they have two dual jobs, I guess, is how I'm reading that.
You're correct. There's
Okay.
Of that 33 positions, there's 33 going to parks at a fee, and then 11 going to Wildlife Resources Division at $440,000.
Okay.
Those will be principally for game management positions, but there may also be some law enforcement county positions around. But as we have talked before, yes, the game management positions are law enforcement, and they do assist in the counties. They work very closely within those two sections to meet customer service needs in the general area where those folks are assigned.
Okay, so to complete, Mr. Chair, if I may, so is it a total of 44 positions for both areas, or is it just the 33 total?
33 for parks and 11 for the Wildlife Resources
All
Division.
right. The language is used pretty much the exact same way in both.
It's misleading.
That's why I wanted you to clarify it.
Yes.
For others who might ask that. Okay. Well, I always feel like the areas that come under your agency benefit the citizens of Georgia immensely, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? I want to ask you, Commissioner, I know there are tremendous needs in the Department of Natural Resources. I talked to our friend, Chairman Bob Lane, and he's very an advocate for your department and many natural resources protection, development in general. What does the Georgia budget for natural resource, how does it compare to, say, South Carolina, North Carolina, or Virginia? Do you know?
Sir, I'd have to get you that information. The funding mechanisms are similar in some states in terms of license sales and the dollars we get from the federal government, but different agencies have different divisions within them. Some have parks, some don't. Some have environmental protection division in them, and some do not. So the answer to your question would probably best be served by giving it to you by division and how those compare. Is there a particular division you're most interested in, or?
Well, I'm interested in all of them, but I'm just curious. I mean, I know that we need to. I know, and then it's the case with so many of our agencies and so many of the things we do in our state, economic development, so many things. I mean, it would be great if we could put more money into it. I really do wish we could put more money into natural resources. I guess wildlife preservation and so many things. And so I was just curious how some other states may be addressing.
We will try to get that information to you.
Okay.
In a comparable form, because it's a lot of times it's apples and oranges.
Okay, we do have a question here.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. On the line 34.73, where you talk about $2 million for campgrounds, renovation, state parks, any breakdown as far as is that evenly throughout the state? Is a larger part of that in any particular area?
It was driven strictly by maintenance needs, but I mean, quite honestly, many of our facilities are probably north of the fall line, but it was driven strictly by the critical maintenance needs spread through the system.
And then on the hatchery, you said $6 million for the hatchery on the Go Fish.
Yes, sir.
Would that be a new hatchery somewhere?
Yes, sir. That's what we anticipate. Will be a brand new hatchery that will be co-located with the visitor center.
Any ideas about where you would be?
We're looking at one of the major interstate corridors, somewhere far enough upstate. We're trying to short stop folks from going to Florida, and the further upstate, the better you are in locating that, whether it's on the 75 or 85, wherever that may be. I think I jokingly said the only place I'm ruling out is Valdosta, but quite honestly, it doesn't make sense to put your visitor center right on the Florida line if you're trying to stop people before they get to Florida and have them fish here and spend their vacations here. But we haven't identified a specific site. We've got staff looking at flow patterns, states that are the losing states, which ones tend to send most of their citizens to Florida, and try to make a good scientific analysis of where the best place for that will be. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I suppose that completes your presentation. I think EPD has a presentation.
Good afternoon. I'd like to review with you two items that appear on your tracking sheet as items 34.3.2 and 34.3.3. Both of these are related to the Governor's recommendation to address one of our serious problems that we have in the state at the moment. Non-point source pollution, runoff from our land, is a serious problem today that is having the result of really affecting our economic development and our opportunity for continued growth in some areas of the state. We have in some areas out of what I would call out of control non-point source pollution. Both of these items are somewhat related to that issue or directly related. I'd like to start with item 34.3.3, which is a request of $680,000 to support work that is required as a consequence of the Lakes Lanier, Allatoona, Carters, and Walter F. George not meeting water quality standards. We are required under our state law as well as the federal law to engage in a process called total maximum daily load studies. The purpose of these studies is to determine what the solutions would be so that we could bring those lakes back into compliance with the water quality standards. Without the opportunity to conduct these standards over the next couple of years and develop a plan that can be improved by federal EPA to get us back in compliance, and until such time that these TMDL studies are completed, we are not going to be able to allow any new significant phosphorus loads from municipal or industrial wastewater treatment plants in major areas of the state, including upstream of Lake Allatoona and upstream of Lake Lanier. This is a very serious, chilling effect on the opportunity for areas that are in high growth in the state at the moment to continue to plan and actually implement expanded or modified needs for municipal or industrial wastewater. These are absolutely critical studies, and we would ask your favorable consideration of them. Much of the problem that appears to be emerging in these lakes are related to the issue of non-point source pollution that I brought up earlier. One major element of non-point source pollution is sediment that needs to remain on the land and not find its way into our waters. Sediment that comes into our waters has its own direct consequences, but many of the pollutants that were of concern are born actually on the soil particles that run off the land. And consequently, one of the other areas that we are asking your consideration of in this budget is the additional investment of monies on $300,000 related to line item 34.3.2, which would allow EPD to continue to grow our erosion and sedimentation control program with the addition of 6 new positions that would be allocated to our high growth areas. The single most number one issue that citizens bring to EPD and the complaints we have that we address in the field are related to uncontrolled runoff and non-point source pollution that are directly as a consequence of eroding sediments and lack of control on sediment and runoff. We get about 9,000 applications every year in EPD for land disturbing activities, and we respond to well over 1,000, approaching 1,200 complaints every year. Most of the work that we're doing at the moment is driven largely by what I would say crisis-oriented response to complaints that citizens have. We're eager to be able to expand the program so that we can begin working with folks that are in conducting land disturbance and our developers earlier in the process so that we aren't visiting them for the first time when things have gotten really bad. So we're interested in certainly shoring up our opportunity to do inspection, but also technical assistance and education in the field while activities are going on. As I indicated earlier, part of the problem contributing to where we find ourselves today, and that is the need to invest in these TMDL studies, is the uncontrolled nature of sediment and erosion runoff. So we both need to do those studies, but we need to continue the development of appropriately located and staffed erosion and sedimentation control inspectors and assistants in the field, and that's what item 34.2.3.2 are. That's an overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question.
It was early, but I do have a question.
Okay. Well, you're 23.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Director Couch. The other area I'd like to talk about, where you're asking for your 6 new erosion and sedimentation inspectors, this office also works with our local governments to help them to train them. So it's, I hate to say it's a trickle-down effect, but it's an effort at the local level and the state level to deal with this issue. But I know it's very complicated, and I know a lot of people feel like we could probably hire several more than you're asking for.
The program as originally scoped when the law was changed to provide for this program, at that point we had made estimates, I think, of ideally about 80 inspectors that would be hired with an EPD. And so what we're doing essentially is developing an incremental approach to bringing inspectors into the programs and deploying them kind of in line with our capabilities and our ability to do high-quality customer service. Having folks that are just deployed out there without good guidance, consistency, and oversight, we can get out in front of things. So, yes, I do anticipate that as growth continues in Georgia, particularly if we continue to have problems addressing non-point source pollution, runoff, erosion, and sedimentation control, you're likely to see requests in the future that continue to put additional folks where we have problems emerging.
Thank you, Director.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I don't think there are any other questions right now. I wanted to ask you, first of all, I appreciate what you do, and everything that you do and EPD does is important. But your agency also is one that tends to aggravate people. Sometimes it aggravates me too. But I wanted to ask you and this may not have anything to do with you. I'm trying to think where this is from, but I hear the commercials on radio where if you carpool, you actually get so much money for carpooling. Does that have anything to do with your agency?
It most certainly does.
Where does that money come from?
The money comes through a federal grant, congestion mitigation quality grant. These are federal transportation dollars that come to Georgia as a consequence of our non-attainment of air quality in the metropolitan area. It's called CMAQ funding. And the CMAQ funds are administered through a cooperative arrangement between EPD and the transportation partners, which include Greta, DOT, and so forth. That money, in part, provides some grant money to help sustain the effort you're talking about, which is the Clean Air Campaign. That's not the sole reliant of funds there, but it is a way to address the issues and problems we have with air emissions through voluntary incentive-based measures rather than heavy-handed regulation.
I appreciate that. And so many things you do, and I say aggravate. I mean, I've had cars fail the the emission testing, and that's just like a major aggravation
Yes, sir.
when it happens. But I'm glad I supported, and of course that's it comes from the federal government anyway, but we had to pass legislation to establish the state guidelines, I guess, to be in compliance with the federal law. But I mean, I know that with as many vehicles as we have on the roads, we can't have vehicles like mine that was not passing out there on the highways. But it is a major aggravation because you're just stuck. You don't know what to do. I mean, my car didn't pass, and if I get it tuned up, is it going to pass? Some cars have. I found out that mine, the one I had at that time, had like 4 catalytic. I thought I was going to have to replace a catalytic converter. It had 4 catalytic converters on it, and so many things that you do, but it is important, and I appreciate what you do. One more question. I'm trying to think, stalling, because I was trying to remember in my mind what it was. When we passed the enhanced emissions testing back in 1996 or 1997, I don't think you were there at that time.
No, I wasn't.
I think in the General Assembly there were only 2 amendments to that, and one of them was mine, and that was the amendment that exempts vehicles driven by people 65 age or older if the car is driven less than 5,000 miles a year or something like that. I can't remember now. But that was actually from one of my constituents who called me that morning, and we got that passed. But the other was over in the Senate. I think Charlie Tanksley got the amendment about the antique vehicles. I think there's an exemption for cars maybe 25 years of age or older. And not too long ago, I was in traffic behind an old Lincoln Continental Mark something, and it had antique car tags on it. It was spewing black fumes out of the back of it. And it was obvious that this was, years-wise, it was an antique vehicle, but it was one this person drove every day. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering, I don't think there is any prohibition. As long as it has the antique tag, then it does not have to have the testing. Is that correct?
I can answer you for sure. I'd be happy to get you an answer for that promptly, but I don't have that level of detail.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. It just seemed like maybe that's something we need to address. An antique vehicle is one thing, and since in many cases they probably wouldn't pass the emissions testing.
I don't know enough about the definition
but
of
for
antique.
one to be driven on the roads every day and have that tag, but still spewing out black fumes back there, coming in through my car that I had to breathe, I didn't appreciate too much. But anyway, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, we did have a couple of people that had asked to address the committee. One was from Catherine Brule. Were you somebody here for her? Okay. And if you'll just make we appreciate you coming, but it is getting late in the day. If you make a brief presentation, we would appreciate it. And I think there's one more after that.
I'm David Word with the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. Very few things in life are guaranteed. I guarantee I'll be finished between 1 and 2 minutes, closer to 1.
Well,
I handed out the information. I won't repeat it. Bottom line, the General Assembly, the governor, has provided $250,000 through the DNR budget to the district for the past few years, and that's continuing. We really appreciate that. My request, I'll be very brief, is just for an additional $150,000. The reason for this increase is that the plans that the district did in 2003 by law are going to be updated in 2008. We're starting now. We must be consistent with the state water plan, which we'll see with the General Assembly and draft this summer. We must do better population projections that are based on the 2000 census that we have now. And most importantly, Metro Atlanta, the 16-county area, has to do much, much, much better, many more muches, in terms of water conservation. The local governments in the district have doubled their dues for the past 2 years to provide this update. We're not asking for a doubling of the state appropriation. We're just asking for an additional $150,000 this year and next year that will allow us to do the updates we want to do. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or talk to you at any time about this request.
I don't see any questions. You might want to be sure to get back with me or members of the committee again sometime before we vote out the final 2008 our version of the 2008 budget, just to remind us again.
Thank you for this opportunity. I will do that.
Thank you. Also, I think the last was we have a gentleman from the Georgia Games and Georgia Games Commission, I guess it's called, and we've heard from him, I think, this is the third year in a row, so if you will make your presentation, and appreciate if you would make it brief, but we need to know, I guess we're starting to wonder, and you're a fellow, I know your office is in Cobb County, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Still in Cobb County. And we want to help, but we're starting to wonder, I guess, why is it that it's not in the budget every year? So
that's a question I can't answer. That's something I hope maybe you guys can find out. But
we can't. We just know that it's something we're having to address every year.
I understand, and we appreciate your support over the last 4 years, actually helping supply that last few years. So I have a bunch of information put in there. I won't go over that, but just hoping that you'll be able to give us kind consideration and be able to help put some funds back in, so we will be able to continue the services and assistance that we do across the state and in the greater Atlanta area. We bring in about $32 million in economic impact a year, impact about at least 100,000 Georgia citizens. So, I mean, there are many things that over the last 4 years, type of thing that we help provide to citizens of Georgia, economic impact and everything else. So I won't take any more of your time, but I just wanted to hopefully that you'll give us kind consideration again and see if you had any questions.
Well, we want to help, and I want to help, but, once, just the way this thing works is once, we make recommendations, then we have to explain as it goes through the process, why did you do that? What have y'all done in the last year? Somebody were asking me, you want to put this money in there, Representative Parsons, what have they done in the last year? What would I tell them if somebody just came to me in a meeting and said, okay, you want to put $50,000 in, what is it that they've done in the last year that would justify us doing another year? What would I say?
We can break it down a few ways. Economic impact-wise, we bring in an average $32 million a year.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm sorry.
Really, but tell me what you did.
Okay.
So I could say, but I want to say, okay, they went to here and they did this and they set up that, and this is what happened. So,
okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Our championships every July, we host basically the Georgia Olympics, about 40 to 44 different sports. In magnitude, it's larger than the Summer Olympics in '96. 10,000 athletes, 50 to 60 different venues held basically in the greater Atlanta area. Our district sports festivals break the state up into 10 different districts in coordination with Georgia Recreation Parks Association. Put on anywhere between 50 to 150 additional events throughout the year across the entire state, mostly in the spring-oriented time. We have our sport medicine symposium, our education division, where we actually help. This year we had over 600 applicants for our educational outreach program, helping develop a number of whether you consider it job training, because it go all the way from high school through grad school, helping provide those opportunities in our specific niche. In helping out the physical fitness and health improvement. We're also one of the linchpins behind the scenes that help out many, many different nonprofit entities out there, from every state organizing body to AAU, different things with GHSA, to all the other community-based organizations. Indirectly probably impact at least 2.5 to 3 million. Mostly youth.
Okay, I want to make sure now. So you're asking us for how much and to put how much in the budget?
We're hoping for at least 50,000.
Okay, let me find it in here.
Bottom one, actually, on the page on the right side, it most likely is not in your tracking document because the recommendation from OPB actually was 0.
So total funds are. But you are receiving other funds. Besides, what about these $382,000? Where does that come from?
Our overall budget, which is a little different in some areas than a number of other agencies, is we have at least 75 to 80% of our entire budget is VIK, value in kind services and products, where we get donations. So if you take our entire budget of the way you need to look at whether we actually have to pay cash for it, it's about $2 million.
And how many people? There's you and who else in the...
Staff-wise, I am the only staff member.
Okay. So, basically everything's been done. How do volunteers help you do these things?
We have about 2,500 general volunteers, and we have a number of different levels. Sport management, sport committee oriented is about 250. Then we got some key volunteers that put in minimum of 100 to 1,000 hours a year, and there are about 40 to 60 of those. And right now I got 10 interns, and I'll have 20 coming in this summer.
Okay, well, and I don't mean any disrespect at all, just because these are, I get asked those questions, and the members of the committee get asked the questions, and it's in all honesty, it's kind of hard it's a hard one for us it's hard for me to explain, even though I've kind of been involved in this part of the process for this is the third year, I guess. We'll certainly try to help out. If we do, and if we do get that in there, it might be a good idea to sometime in this next year, sometime this next cycle, to when you're coordinating and putting on some of these events, it might be a good idea just to invite some of the members of the subcommittee to attend, just so they kind of see. I mean, that way it'd be a lot easier for us then to understand and explain to somebody else what it is that we're trying to put the money in for, if we actually could see. So
I definitely agree.
Well, I appreciate you coming. It's late in the day, and like I say, the meeting's going on all over the place. I appreciate the subcommittee members coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That does conclude